Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We have a stellar panel for you, looking at the evolving role of brand, and I'm super excited to invite up onto the stage two women who are really leading the charge, working on two of the biggest sports partnerships in England. So please welcome onto stage Katie Bauman from Barclays and Marie Hallgate from VMO2. Hello.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Thank you for coming on stage. We're going to start off. We're going to go back to the start because if you know anything about sports partnerships, we're here with two of the brands who've been in the business for the longest. We're looking at 20 years plus. And I think I want to start, Katie, with you. Starting with the Premier League, can you take us back and tell us how did the partnership come about and give us a bit of detail about why you did it and where it is now?
I just need to caveat, I wasn't there when they did it, so I can't take any credit for that, unfortunately. But it was 22 years ago, which is really quite incredible. And at that time, Barclays was looking to expand into multiple global markets. The Premier League was looking to do the same. So it seemed like the perfect fit at that time. And the things that were really important to Barclays at that moment was around brand exposure in those different markets. So having Barclays as a title sponsor of the Premier League, so it was mentioned every time the Premier League was mentioned, was hugely important for us. Believe it or not, there was somebody that was actually monitoring how many times Barclays Premier League was said, and if it was only Premier League, they used to get a...
Who's had that job in this room? When we started out, we've all been there.
Even the managers of all the clubs used to get monitored and get slapped wrists if they said Premier League without saying Barclays. Our logo on all of the perimeter boards, all of those types of things was really important to us. So that expansion into global markets was really the key driver. That has evolved hugely, as you can imagine. Not only has Barclays' strategy massively evolved to not be so global, but more kind of transatlantic, so the UK and the US, but also what our customers and our clients want from us is completely different. So that sort of mass exposure, our name on everything, isn't so important to us anymore. It's more about what we do.
Can we talk a bit about the commercials as well? Because I think this is something probably we don't really talk about in our space in terms of one of the other reasons that you entered the partnership is actually for the bank, it was beneficial with those relationships.
Yeah, it's something we don't talk about very often, purposefully really, but people might not know we bank the Premier League, we bank the FA, we bank 15 of the clubs, we take payments at multiple venues, Premier League club venues. We are the bank for lots of the players. So you can imagine the kind of commercials that come with that is a huge driver for us as well. So it kind of is a bit of a no-brainer, but that's not to say that everything else that comes with the partnership, all the rights that we get, the way we can use it to market ourselves isn't as important as those commercials as well, but people might not know about the first bit.
We've got a nice throwback image of I was going to say young-looking Roy Keane, but he's always kind of looked the same, hasn't he?
I think he ages quite well, actually.
And Marie, O2 Rugby, I mean, probably, we try and work it out all the time, maybe one of the longest shirt partnerships in the world. I think we may be the second or first.
Yeah, one of. We use the term one of, yeah.
Can you take us back to the beginning and how it all came about?
Yeah, sure. So we've been a partner for 27 years, believe it or not. And I'd caveat as well, I wasn't around when the deal was first signed. And yeah, you know, it was in the mid-90s, you know, the mobile market was booming. And we wanted to be a brand, you know, wanted to create a brand that really stood for something and that could engage with our customers. And at the time, 1995, the game, you know, turned professional. And we saw an opportunity. We thought, you know, we could be the telco and the network for hopefully an army of England rugby fans that was set to explode. So, you know, very much use it for kind of driving brand fame, obviously having our logo kind of front and center on the shirt. But we've used the shirt very much as a platform for brand awareness, but also customer loyalty and retention. So actually a lot of the rights and the assets and the amazing experiences we get, we channel back directly to our customers via our customer loyalty and platform priority. And I guess to pick up on your point around the, you know, the commercial element, I mean, it does deliver for us. I mean, probably not surprising to say that our customer base that engage with rugby, you know, are highly valuable to us. They often have a higher propensity to buy kind of multiple products, etc. So, you know, this partnership, yes, it delivers from a brand fame and having our logo front and center. You know, it's a high-performing media channel for us, but equally it's an opportunity for us to talk to a very important, valuable customer base via their passion point of rugby.
And I think we can tell from these pictures how much the partnerships have evolved and how much the sports have changed as well. Marie, I'll come back to you. So, you know, you had this reason, you were in the space for brand fame. It was just the men's team sort of 26 years ago. Where are we now? Where's the partnership and how's it evolved?
Yeah, so yeah, as you said, you know, historically we did just sponsor the men's team, and then back in 2013, and I think it was, we started sponsoring the women's 15s elite team, formerly known as the Red Roses. So in 2017, we were the first to kind of do an big above the line campaign for the women for their Rugby World Cup. And that was kind of, we had this campaign called Love the Game, Wear the Rose, and it was born off this insight that actually when you ask people, you know, around why they you know, what do they love about women's rugby, actually they use terms such as, you know, it's exhilarating, it's hard hitting, it's exciting, you know, all the same terms that are used to describe why people follow men's rugby. So we came up with the concept, Love the Game, Wear the Rose. And then kind of fast forward, you know, 2018, we were, again, one of the first brands to kind of put the men alongside the women in our locked up creative. So kind of we've really evolved, you know, what started as a very kind of brand fame-led partnership to more a purpose-led partnership where actually we can use it as an amazing showcase to talk about our inclusion and diversity commitments as well as a business.
And I think we can be honest, there was a bit of a leap of faith, because I remember back in 2017 and we were looking at, you know, do we create this Women's World Cup campaign? We had to go to the board and get sign off on the budget. We didn't have all the data. We had a bit of intuition that we were reaching a younger audience. We had a little bit of data, but it did take a bit of a leap of faith, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And amazingly, you know, we were really proud to see actually as a result of that 2017 campaign, I think the audience that we hit was pretty much 50-50, male, female. It was a lot younger, you know, we were hitting 18 to 35-year-olds and a real diverse demographic as well. And I think, you know, it just was a proof point to us that actually we could reach a completely different audience that we weren't able to through what was a very long-standing, you know, partnership with the men's team. So yeah, it was a real learning for us. And, you know, you only have to look at our results for a lot of our Red Roses campaigns and, you know, you see you know, we get the most positive sentiment, the most engagement with those campaigns.
And Katie, Barclays has been on quite a journey as well in the women's space. I mean, probably leading the charge for women's sport in England, it's fair to say.
I'd like to think so, yeah. I think we've been on a journey in football, actually, more broadly. So from the days I just mentioned around the Barclays Premier League to now where we are official banking partner of the Premier League, and we are activating the partnership probably as much in the US as we are in the UK. And then the evolution, I would say, I'd use the word evolution, of our footprint in football to include the Barclays Women's Super League, which I think was also a bit of a leap of faith, if I'm honest, for the same reasons as it was for you. 4 years ago when we signed that deal, it was still on the promise of it being a growth sport. There was not any direct data showing that at that point. And we also signed a huge grassroots initiative with the FA. And I'm not that embarrassed to say that actually when we did it, all we wanted to do was make sure that at a grassroots level, we were creating the biggest impact at scale as possible. The programme was the Barclays Girls Football Schools Partnership, which is a massive mouthful. And I think the FA had to explain to me about 10 times what that actually was before I actually fully understood the impact that it was making and what we were doing. So again, that was a bit of a leap of faith as well. But we have come on to where we are now. And it's really, that leap of faith has really paid off. The growth that we're seeing in women's football doesn't need any explanation from me. And Barclays I felt like we were at the forefront of that. You know, we really did take a punt on it, and it wasn't because necessarily we thought it was going to become this phenomenon. It was more because it was the right thing to do. We were talking about renewing our Premier League partnership at the time. We do that every 3 years. And we knew that we couldn't renew the Premier League without making a massive statement in the women's game as well. And I'm so glad we did.
How important is that from you, from, I guess, a colleagues and customer point of view? Because obviously if you look at your workforce, you look at the country, it's 50-50. Is there an element of, you know, showing up for equality as well, and just showing up that, you know, you respect the sexes equally? How important was that?
Massively important, but I don't think I really understood how important it was until we did it and I saw the response. We, at the time, our CEO at the time, received about 300 individual emails from colleagues telling him how proud they were to work for a bank that supported women's sport in the way that we did, with the investment that we did. I mean, and you can imagine the usual emails that our CEO gets aren't, even remotely positive. And we also, our media relations team said that the sentiment around Barclays as a brand during that time of that WSL announcement was the most positive it had been in 8 years. So, yes, we knew it was important. I just don't think we realised to the extent.
I think that leads me on to my next question around authenticity. And I think you've obviously both been in the sport for a long, long time, but also you're showing up in a certain way. And I want to talk about how important that is. I think it was a really interesting conversation yesterday with Maggie and Helen and that certain Saudi deal with the Women's World Cup. And when you talk about the misalignment, I think that's probably peak misalignment, where I think with your brands, you've come into the space, you've got to know the space, and you've acted in a certain way and supported the sport and its fans. Can you tell me, I guess, what you do and why that's important? Katie, if I start with you.
I would like to think that nothing we do is token. We do the do as much as we do the say. And I think that I'd like to think also that people don't think that of us as a brand. I feel like we've built enough equity over the last 22 years for people to not question why Barclays. Well, Barclays because we care about football and we care about football fans and we care about everything that football stands for. And we pick partnerships, and not just with rights holders, but with talent very carefully. One of our brand ambassadors, Ian Wright, is as authentic as they come. What you see is what you get with him. He cares deeply about the women's game. And I think you see that from the way he shows up for us, but also the way he shows up on broadcast and stuff. So I think that the partnerships we've chosen to do, the grassroots initiatives we have invested heavily in and we continue to do, the people we choose to partner with are all, I hope, testament of why we are authentic in this space.
And I think as well, it could have been really easy to walk away from the Premier League after you've been there for so long. But again, you've stuck with football. And I feel like that is an element of, sticking with the sport and working hard to make it work for you, but also for your customers and your staff.
Definitely. And it was never the WSL at the expense of the Premier League. It was always both. And it was never the elite game at the expense of grassroots, or vice versa. It was always Barclays' commitment to football in the round. And I think that we've got more of a job to do with talking about our support of football in the round. We still sort of talk about Premier League and the WSL. I think, the fact that lots of the WSL teams are also in the Premier League, I think there's opportunities for us to really, really cement our support of football, not men's, not women's, but football, because that is why everybody loves the game, because it's football, not because of who plays it.
God, we love football. Marie...
And rugby.
And rugby. On, again, authenticity, I guess, again, how you've showed up in both the men's and women's game, but can you tell us a bit about this image and how this campaign came about and where we are now?
Yeah, I mean, this was, I guess first point just around, authenticity and kind of to build a little bit on your point. Obviously, we've been a partner for a long, long time, and obviously that helps. As you said, that investment, we've invested in the game for a long time, so, it's important we show up. But I think it's consistency of how we've showed up and shown our support as well. And I think we've always had this sort of motto that we're England Rugby's biggest fan, and let's be honest, we work in the world of sport, and sometimes it doesn't always go our way. And I think regardless of, it's really important. Obviously, we're there in 2003 when they won the Rugby World Cup, and they're coming back for this, celebration home parade. But we were also there in 2019 when there was heartbreak, and they came out of that final, obviously, against South Africa. And we've been always very consistent, this kind of motto, win, lose, or draw, we wear the rose. And I think it's that consistency of support and message that has ensured that, the success of our partnership, that we do have high, attribution, etc. And then I guess from a diversity and inclusion, as a business, it's become progressively more and more important for us. We've set some pretty bold targets internally around kind of gender parity, also kind of representation of ethnic minorities in the organisation. And so it's really important, as a business, if we're committing to that as a workforce, that obviously shows up also in our partnerships. So this image, actually, you know, we were one of the first brands, and it seems crazy to say this in 2018, that put the kind of men and women alongside each other in one campaign, simple as that, and we've been kind of, you know, consistently doing that ever since.
And what happened during COVID as well? Because I'm really keen for you to talk about the renewal process you went through and the huge commitment you made as a brand.
Yeah. So, yeah, crazily, in the height of the pandemic, we were busy working away on a renewal for England Rugby. And basically, this was kind of inspired by our D&I, basically, commitments. And essentially, we made a bit of a landmark deal. So we essentially agreed that to spend parity between the men's and the women's game. So essentially, for every marketing pound that we invest in the men's game, we will absolutely do the same for the women's. And we've been kind of honouring that commitment ever since, whether that be, you know, access to priority tickets, you know, through our O2 Inside Line content series, you know, through all the activations and campaigns that we've done, such as this. So it's something we kind of live by through the partnership.
And I think the next topic I want to talk about is building on authenticity. So if you're showing up in the right space, you become ingrained in the culture. And I was very lucky to have my two panellists on stage that actually have two great examples for this. The first is one of my favourites with any football fans in the room. Any amazing moments you've been seeing recently in the Barclays Premiership. People go, classic Barclays. You're not even the title sponsor anymore, but that's still the sentiment. And it's a really lovely, positive hark back to just brilliant football times. Katie, what do you think? Did you expect this would ever happen, that you'd become a meme, essentially?
No, it's what you all hope for as a brand, isn't it? But I never expected it to last this long after we stopped being title sponsor. This sort of halo effect has really stuck around. It's just really heartwarming. I feel like it's a really, it's like a nickname. You know, when somebody gives you a really nice nickname and you feel really warm about it, this is how I feel about when people call it the Barclays. It also shows a real affinity to the league. The way that this is used is to talk about the highs, the lows, the competitive nature of the league, the fact you'll never know what's going to happen. And that sums up the Premier League. It's why it's the most watched league in the world. We just came from a Premier League event where, you know, some of the figures are just staggering, aren't they? 1.66 billion people follow the Premier League worldwide. It's the most followed league in the world. And it's because of this, because of all the reasons that people call it the Barclays, which for us to be connected with that is just insane.
And also for a bank, you know, we can be honest, you know, it's not a lifestyle brand or a personal brand, but for, you know, a bank to have that warmth and affection and brand love that normally you have to spend quite a lot of marketing budget behind to get, how you're showing up in sport, you're getting that as a result.
Well, we hope that that's the reason for it. We are the most connected brand with football beside Nike, which is insane, isn't it, really, if you think about it? Nike being a brand that people just reel off their tongue, whether they are or aren't associated with the sport, because they just assume that they would be. So for us to be second only to them really is a great testament to the work that has been done over the last 22 years to your point, show up in the right way. Fans, I think, trust us.
Couldn't agree more. And I think we've seen similar in rugby with Wear the Rose, which I think it's fair to say has now become vernacular for Sporting England Rugby. If you go online, probably since 2015, it is the hashtag of choice for any England fan. Can you tell us a bit more about how it came about, Marie?
Yeah, so the hashtag came about in 2015 as part of the home Rugby World Cup. And there was kind of two sort of reasons behind it, actually. One, we wanted to kind of associate ourselves with the emblem that is carried on every England rugby shirt, and that the red rose. And, you know, through speaking to players and fans, you only have to talk to them to know how much pride they take in kind of wearing that rose. And that shirt just so happens to carry a lovely O2 logo on the front as well. And then secondly, for us, we wanted to create a bit of a call to action. You know, we wanted a bit of a rally cry. We wanted to create a bit of a movement for fans, things that people could get behind. And it's amazing, you know, even as the huge business and organisation that we are, hashtag Wear the Rose, 8 years on, is still here. It's still probably one of our highest performing hashtags as a business. And at peak tournament times, you know, it's often the top performing hashtag. We get plenty of share, voice, etc. And I also think the beauty of it is it's also really flexible. So, you know, we've been able to kind of adapt it with different campaigns based on insight. So as you've seen for the women's, we had Love the Game, Wear the Rose, which was based on insight. And then, you know, during the Rugby World Cup, you know, the games moved on. And we talked about the fact that they were right, history was being written, Wear the Rose. So it's something that sort of stood the test of time and certainly have no reason to change it at the moment.
Can't wait to see what we come up with for the Rugby World Cup. We've talked about lots of positive stuff, but I think it's really important to talk about the challenges as well. We're all in sport because it resonates with our audiences. It's a way to connect to customers through things they love, but it doesn't always go to plan, and I think that's fair on and off the pitch. Katie, I'll come to you first in terms of the challenges you've seen probably in the men's and women's space, and I guess how you react as a brand. What do you do if something goes wrong, and you know, what can you do?
I mean, you are inevitably associated with the sport that you attach yourself to, so good and bad. So we can take all the credit for the growth of the Women's League and all of that, but we can also have to take some responsibility for the hiccups or the challenges or hurdles along the way. This, I think, is to illustrate the frozen pitch gate at the beginning of the year when WSL games are cancelled because of frozen pitches, which, when you imagine it being an elite game, you could never imagine that happening in the Premier League. It would never happen in the Premier League because their pitches are, you know, well equipped to withstand a bit of frost. And we have to take some responsibility for, or fans and the consumers look to us to take some responsibility for that. So, you know, what are you doing? How are you putting pressure on the FA to combat stuff like this? So we are making sure and leaning into the Premier League around the future of pitches and of facilities and of, you know, comms to fans as well, and playing out as much of a role as we can. You know, bear in mind we're not the league, to make sure that fans and customers and our customers are getting the best from the sport. I think one of the other big challenges we had, which we've kind of forgotten about because of COVID, but our first season as league sponsor got cancelled early. The league got cancelled early. We made this huge song and dance. We came out all guns blazing going, yep, we're going to grow the league. This is going to be amazing. It finished early because of COVID. When the Premier League continued to play. And so that was a really, you know, a massive blow for us. And I think that the way that we communicated it, the way that we continued to talk about the great months that we had during that season, and that you know, it was just a sort of temporary problem. That's how I think we combated it, just drawing on all the positives, looking to the future, and continuing to talk about how we are investing and helping to grow the game. We're not just putting our name on the league logo.
No, and then you also had the Premier League carrying on and having to sort of balance brand new shiny league not happening, and then Premier League is obviously still cracking on. Marie, with you, we've had similar challenges in rugby. Can you take us back to this campaign and tournament?
Yeah, so I guess the one thing that you can't control as a partner is, unfortunately, performance on the pitch. And you know, this is back in 2015, and I think everyone will probably be aware of this. You know, it was a big year, home Rugby World Cup, a hell of a lot of pressure on the team, a lot of excitement building, and we did a big, massive above-the-line campaign, Make Them Giants here, and spoiler alert, they didn't make it out of the group stages, which you know, was unfortunate. But I think, again, just to echo the point I said earlier, what was really important is that regardless of the result, you know, we always have the ethos, win, lose or draw, we wear the rose. And obviously we had to pivot that campaign very, very quickly. Just another point I guess I wanted to make, just around challenges, a slightly different one. So the women's game, the Red Roses are doing amazing, amazing things. You know, currently #1 in the world. Absolutely.
53,000 tickets sold for Twickenham this Saturday. Get your seats.
Yes, tickets still available.
World record, Sugar Babes are playing. It's going to be banging.
We couldn't help but give a little shout out there. But I guess with the women's, you can't help but, you know, looking at the Six Nations, you know, inevitably, I think it's probably not a huge surprise that France and England are kind of at the Grand Slam decider. And whilst obviously we love it when the Red Roses win, always, you know, equally as a partner in that sport, we want to see a sport that excels, and we know for that to happen and for it to reach its kind of commercial potential, you know, there needs to be jeopardy, there needs to be competition. But what I would say is just the future is so, so bright. We've seen that Ireland and Wales are now fully professional. Only yesterday sat here, Sally from World Rugby was talking about their Accelerate programme, which is all about investing and fast-tracking the women's game and investing and working with the union. So it's absolutely coming. So excited for that. But a slight challenge, we're in this this middle ground at the moment where the Red Roses are just that little bit ahead of others. But obviously we don't want them to get everyone else to catch up too much.
Still want to win on Saturday.
Exactly.
I guess then probably the key talking point of this whole session is how the brands are evolving. 22, 26 years, a long time in the business. I love this next picture we've got up, Katie, because it just represents, you were talking about it's just football, and this little boy growing up will be like, it's just football. What's next for Barclays, and what do you want to see going forward?
We want to see more of these sorts of pictures week in, week out. This was at one of our Barclays big games, which is the term we've coined for the games that are played in the men's stadiums. We have one of those at every club once a season. I want to see that happening all the time. I want to see the women playing in, not necessarily the men's stadiums, but in their own proper stadiums they don't have to share. I want to see more young people being involved and being able to play, particularly girls in schools. So our huge campaign around getting equal access for girls in schools by 2024 is well on track, helped massively by the recent government announcement around PE. We are now there's football offered in 15,500 schools for girls. When we started, it was 3,000. So we are, doing really good things there. So I just think that we need to evolve the game at the elite level and at the grassroots level. You can't do one or the other because they are intrinsically linked. You need pathways, you need role models. And I just hope that we continue on this journey that has been so amazing for the last 4 years. I really can't wait to see what the future holds.
Do you think we'll be in a position, so we've just come from the Premier League forum room and they'll talk about the huge growth globally. As a brand, it's something we should be really proud of. Is that where we can get the Barclays WSL down the line? Can this become the pinnacle of women's football?
Of course it can. Why wouldn't it? 50% of our population is female. The Premier League, they didn't have 1.6 billion followers 22 years ago when we first partnered with them. It's a journey. And you and I have talked about this a lot, about it being like a startup company almost. You need to give it time to breathe and grow in the right way as well. We need to learn from the men's game, not copy the men's game. And I think that it has absolutely every opportunity to be, the biggest. It is the biggest domestic league in the world already. But with numbers-wise, we need to just keep going and going down on the trajectory we're going. And with the likes of Sky bringing the energy to the broadcast, it's just been incredible. And the transition of the WSL from the FA to a new co, which is going to be imminent as well, which is obviously deemed the right thing for the game. So let's see where that takes it as well. But there's absolutely no reason why we can't be having those sorts of Premier League conversations for the WSL.
Might have to revisit this question in 10 years' time.
Please.
Marie, what's happening with O2 Rugby? Where are we going next?
Yeah, so, again, long-standing partner, we're always about innovation. With the women's game, so we've actually just signed a really exciting collaboration with the RFU and Women's Sport Trust. And that's really for us to kind of get under the skin of the potential of the women's audience. And ultimately, we'll work on research and insights and thought leadership that will enable us to shape kind of campaigns and activations that genuinely will make an impact in this space. So we've made this quite public commitment that we want to kind of close the gender awareness gap. And we saw some amazing results off the back of the Rugby World Cup. We saw a 14% increase in the Red Roses awareness, but there's still so much more we can do. And I guess a couple of things, I've seen the visual that's just flashed up, that can bring some of, how we're using those insights. So in the Rugby World Cup last year, we actually, alongside the RFU, co-funded the first ever women's rugby-focused documentary around the England rugby team. It took you kind of behind the scenes, all the blood, sweat and tears that it takes, obviously, to be performing at that elite level and to make selection ahead of a huge tournament. And we were delighted that it got picked up by ITV. So it was aired on ITV. I think it was actually the eve of the Rugby World Cup starting. We had over 1 million views of people tuning in. And the most exciting thing for us, actually, through the Women's Sport Trust research, we saw people who actually watched that documentary went on to watch significantly more of the tournament. And again, it's that kind of hunch. We sort of had this feeling that we you know, these girls, they're unbelievably talented athletes, but equally they're such lovable personalities, and we knew if we kind of shined a spotlight on these characters that people would want to follow them. So we were delighted with that. And then I can't obviously help but mention the game this Saturday, and again, kind of using insights to see how we kind of can grow the fan base. So we're co-funding the Sugar Babes, are performing at half-time, and that's all about kind of getting bums on seats. And again, through research, we know that, you know, you just need that first-time viewing of women's sport. Once you've got someone in and they've seen it and they see the quality and they see how good it is, they're hooked and they're going to come to the next game. So working close in that, and then obviously I can't but mention, of course, there being a Men's Rugby World Cup this year. You know, we've got a new head coach in Steve Borthwick, who replaced Eddie Jones in the Six Nations. So, you know, getting to know him and no doubt working on a huge campaign that will, you know, hopefully generate a wave of support going into that tournament as well. So lots of exciting things for us to be focused on.
So much. Marie and Katie, that was such a brilliant chat. And if you want to see these brilliant brands in action, we've got the end of the WSL, 27th of May. Get yourself down to a ground, tune in. It's going to be brilliant. Will Chelsea win? Who knows? And then obviously this Saturday, the message might have not landed yet, but buy a ticket. Marie, Katie, thank you.
Thank you very much.